Friends, so in this section we are going to discuss the physiology of memory. So before understanding the physiology of memory, that's how memory is formed, how memory is consolidated, and other aspects, we should know something about the dominant and the non-dominant hemispheres. So in all the individuals there are two cerebral hemispheres. One of the cerebral hemispheres is called as the dominant hemisphere and the other is called as the non-dominant hemisphere. So dominant hemisphere in most of the individuals, almost in 96% of the right-handed individuals and in 70% of the left-handed individuals, the dominant hemisphere is always the left hemisphere. So in majority of the cases, it's the left hemisphere which is the dominant hemisphere. And in so automatically the right hemisphere is the non-dominant hemisphere. However, in a very small proportion of people, right hemisphere can be the dominant hemisphere. Now, the new term used for these dominant and non-dominant hemispheres are dominant hemisphere is called as the categorical hemisphere and the non-dominant hemisphere is called as the representational hemisphere. So dominant hemisphere is the categorical hemisphere and the non-dominant hemisphere is the representational hemisphere. Now, the functions that are performed by the dominant hemisphere are always based on logic. So, dominant hemisphere always performs logic based functions. So, dominant hemisphere is logic based. On the other hand, the representational hemisphere or the non dominant hemisphere is intuition based. Okay, it's intuition based. Dominant hemisphere performs some important functions which are associated with learning, memory, language, and even speech. So these are important functions performed by dominant hemisphere. Non-dominant hemisphere performs an important function of spatial orientation. So we are able to locate ourselves in the room without thinking much. It's the function of non-dominant hemisphere, and it's also associated with creativeness and music, etc. So people who are fond of music, mainly non-dominant hemisphere is active. Okay, so these are the two dominant and the non-dominant hemispheres. Now we all know the functions of these hemispheres. So if there is a lesion in the dominant hemisphere, it mainly impairs the speech and language function, so the person develops aphasia. So in the lesion of dominant hemisphere there is aphasia, whereas in the lesion of non-dominant hemisphere, now this spatial orientation is altered, so it will result in a condition which is called as asterognosis. So normally I am able to identify this object as a pen even if I keep my eyes closed. By just feeling, by looking around the shape of the object, I am able to feel the shape of this pen, so I say this is a pen even if my eyes are closed. So in these persons, they will not be able to identify the object by their shape and size, so this is known as asterognosis, and this results in another important condition which is called as personal neglect syndrome. So these people will not be aware of one half of their body, so they will completely neglect a half of their body, which is called as the personal neglect syndrome. So these are the dominant and the non-dominant hemisphere. Now the memory function, it's mainly associated with the dominant hemisphere. So whenever in the process of acquiring information, first step is we have to acquire the information. So we have to, now this can be called as learning. So whenever we try to acquire information, and then we need to store that information, so the storage of information is called as memory. So acquiring of information is called as learning, and the storage of information, it is called as memory. Now learning, the physiological aspects of learning, that's the areas of brain involved in learning and other types of learning, they'll be discussed in a separate section. In this section we are mainly going to focus on the memory part, the physiology of memory. Now what is the physiological basis of memory, how is this memory formed, and how information is stored? So before understanding that, some areas of the nervous system which are important in memory, these are the hippocampus, thalamus, and the cerebellum. So memory, physiologically, this memory is formed by alteration of the synaptic transmission at various neuronal synapses in these parts of brain, mainly in the hippocampus. So by altering synaptic transmission, we can create new memories, and uh, we can even some memories which we want to get rid of, that can also be achieved by altering of synaptic transmission in a proper way. So these are the main areas involved. Now we should have some idea about the hippocampus, since it's the main part involved in memory, and it performs a lot of functions in the physiology of memory. So hippocampus, if this is the section of the cerebral cortex, Hippocampus is mainly located in the medial temporal lobe. So in the middle part of the temporal lobe, these are the hippocampus. It's a paired structure. It means one hippocampus is present on each side of the brain. It is located in the medial temporal lobe of the brain, medial temporal cortex. Now, if we take a look at a magnified image of the hippocampus, so the hippocampus, this is the typical structure of hippocampus. So it looks somewhat like a seahorse or something. So this is the hippocampus. Now if we go through the section of hippocampus, we'll be able to understand various areas in the hippocampus and various types of neurons which are important in memory. So if we take a look at the section of the hippocampus, so now this is the section of hippocampus. Hippocampus consists of certain areas which are known as the CA areas. So there are 4 CA areas. These are known as CA4, CA3, CA2 and CA1 areas. And these CA areas, this part is continuous with another part of the hippocampus. So this part is called as the subiculum. In continuation with the CA areas of hippocampus is another structure called as subiculum. Now this subiculum, the part of the cerebral cortex which lies adjacent to this, is called as the entorhinal cortex. Now this part is the entorhinal cortex which receives the efferent impulses to the hippocampus. So they are received from this entorhinal cortex. Now another part of hippocampus, this is called as the dentate gyrus of hippocampus, since it resembles a teeth, it resembles a tooth, so it's called as dentate gyrus. So among these CA areas, CA1 neurons are most important in the function of memory, and this entorhinal cortex itself, it receives efferent impulses from the neocortex. So from the neocortex of the cerebrum, the impulses go to the entorhinal cortex. Now these impulses are mainly for the short-term memory, and then the consolidation of memory takes place in the hippocampus, which is mainly in the CA1 neurons. So as I already told you, memory is formed by the alteration of synaptic transmission. It means memory can be produced when the synaptic transmission is altered. Now this synaptic transmission can be altered by various mechanisms, and if synaptic transmission is increased, that results in formation of more memory, a better memory and a stronger memory. And the most important reason for this alteration of synaptic transmission is the property of synapse, which is called as synaptic plasticity. It itself means that the synaptic transmission can be altered by various mechanisms. So the synaptic transmission, it can be increased, so in that's called as the process of facilitation. If the synaptic transmission is facilitated, it results in formation of stronger memories. Now another mechanism by which synaptic transmission can be increased is by formation of new pathways between neurons. So these pathways are called as memory traces. Now whenever we start thinking about that event again, so that causes activation of these memory traces and it reproduces the memory. So that's how we are able to recall these events. Now synaptic transmission can also be decreased. So in that case, the memory that we have, we are going to lose that memory. That process is called as the habituation. So in the process of habituation, the synaptic transmission is going to decrease and we are going to get rid of memories. Now physiologically, this is also a very important process. At certain times we need to forget some memories, and it happens automatically. So this process is a habituation, it is a physiological process. Now as I already told you, facilitation is a process by which the synaptic transmission increases. So there are various methods by which we can increase the synaptic transmission. So facilitation is also called as sensitization, or it has another name, it's also called as post-terminal potentiation. So these are all other names of facilitation. Now how does facilitation exactly take place? So facilitation takes place, that means that the synaptic transmission can be increased by either increasing the release of neurotransmitter. So if neurotransmitter will be released, there will be more synaptic transmission. By increasing the formation of vesicles which contain neurotransmitters, so again more neurotransmitter will be released. By increasing the presynaptic terminals, so if presynaptic terminals will be increased, automatically there will be more synaptic transmission. And by changing the structure of the dendritic spikes, so when the structure of dendritic spikes change, it results in increase in the synaptic transmission. So all these change, they eventually increase synaptic transmission and cause facilitation, which results in formation of memories. Now these changes these changes can be divided into two types. So the release of neurotransmitter, vesicles, and presynaptic terminals, these are the chemical changes, and the change in the structure is the physical change. So physical change or chemical change, they can occur either temporarily or they can occur permanently. Now, when these changes occur permanently, it means that the memory is converted into long-term memory. So the memory that we have is the long-term memory. It's going to last for months, years, or even a lifetime. However, if these changes occur temporarily, then such a thing happens in case of intermediate term memory. So these changes occur temporarily. It lasts for a few weeks, and then we forget this memory unless it's converted into long-term memory. So this was the facilitation. In a few moments, we'll discuss the molecular mechanism of facilitation. Now, another physiological process is the habituation. So habituation means decrease in the synaptic transmission. So there is attenuation of synaptic transmission. Now, it can occur by mechanisms which are exactly opposite to these. There is decrease in neurotransmitter release, decreased formation of vesicles, or even some physical change. So there will be decreased synaptic transmission that will result in habituation. Now it's important, for example, in infants, when infants try to learn to walk, many times they fall while walking. So that memory of how to walk is not correct, and that needs to be attenuated. So habituation occurs in that case. So it's also an important phenomenon. Now, facilitation and habituation. So now we'll discuss the molecular mechanism of facilitation and habituation. Now, habituation, it's also called as long-term depression. So the molecular mechanism of facilitation and habituation. Now, in order to understand the molecular mechanism, we should be aware about some terms. So in the parts of the brain which are mainly associated with memory, there are neurons present. So one of the neurons, which is a presynaptic neuron. Now in this case, this presynaptic neuron is called as the sensory neuron, and another neuron, which is a postsynaptic neuron. So this is the postsynaptic neuron on which the neurotransmitter released from presynaptic neuron is going to act. Now, this presynaptic neuron, another neuron synapses with the presynaptic neuron. This neuron is called as the facilitatory neuron. So this neuron is called as facilitatory neuron. Okay. Now, the neurotransmitter which is released by facilitatory neuron is serotonin, that's 5-HT, and the receptors for serotonin, they are present on the presynaptic neuron itself. So serotonin is going to act on these receptors. Now, presynaptic neuron itself contains the neurotransmitter glutamate in the vesicles. Once this glutamate is released in the synapse, it's going to act on its receptors, which are called as NMDA receptors on the postsynaptic terminal. Now these receptors are actually calcium channels, so they will cause influx of calcium. So calcium will accumulate in the postsynaptic neuron and it will produce various effects. Now, if there is stimulation of only presynaptic neuron or the sensory neuron, so if only sensory neuron is stimulated, action potential will be generated at first. However, after some time, this action potential will eventually decrease and then it is going to stop. So there will be no action potential after some time. So this is the habituation. So decrease in synaptic transmission, and it occurs automatically as the time goes on. There is habituation, so it cannot create a strong memory. We cannot remember things for a long time. However, if there is stimulation of the facilitatory as well as presynaptic neuron, it is going to cause process of facilitation. That means it is going to increase the synaptic transmission more than normal, and it will help us to create a stronger memory. So how does this occur? Whenever there is stimulation of facilitatory neuron, so there will be release of neurotransmitter serotonin from the facilitatory neuron. Now this neurotransmitter is going to act on its receptors on the presynaptic neuron or the sensory neuron, and these receptors are G protein coupled receptors. In the section of ANS we will discuss these receptors. They cause increase in cyclic AMP, which cause stimulation of protein kinase, and protein kinase is responsible for phosphorylating potassium channels in these neurons. So potassium channels get closed, and as a result there is depolarization, which increases calcium channels. So more calcium influx occurs, and this calcium in the presynaptic neuron causes release of more and more neurotransmitter in the synaptic left. So there is increase in the synaptic transmission, so this results in facilitation. So in this case, synaptic transmission increases if there is stimulation of both these neurons, so that results in facilitation. This is the molecular mechanism of facilitation. Now this calcium, it can act as a secondary messenger and cause formation of various proteins. These proteins will cause certain physical or structural change in the synapse, which will result in strengthening of the synapse. So again, this will result in strengthening of synapse, and it will help to create a stronger memory. So again, these are physical and chemical changes which we already discussed. Now, let us have a discussion of types of memory. So there are various types of memory. The first classification is the explicit memory and the implicit memory. So the first type of memory is called as the explicit memory, and the other explicit memory, and the other is implicit memory. So explicit memory is the memory which is associated with remembering facts, places, and events in one's life. Okay, so we are able to remember facts, places. It's because of explicit memory. Now it itself has two components. One component is called as a semantic memory, which is associated with remembering facts and places, and the other is the episodic memory, which is mainly associated with remembering events. Okay, so we are able to remember facts, places, and events because of explicit memory, and the areas of the brain which are involved, they are mainly the conscious area. So it involves consciousness. It's not a subconscious type of memory, it's a conscious type of memory. It is also called as declarative memory. It is also called as declarative memory, and the areas of brain which are involved in this, they are the hippocampus and the medial temporal cortex. Medial temporal cortex. So hippocampus, it's mainly involved in the episodic memory, and the medial temporal cortex. So this is explicit memory. Another type of memory is called as the implicit memory. Now implicit memory, it is also called as non-declarative memory. Non-declarative memory. Now implicit memory is the subconscious type of memory, so it involves subconscious part of the brain. Okay, now explicit memory we already discussed, it involves consciousness, whereas implicit memory involves subconsciousness. So if we learn something, then next time we are able to do that exactly in a proper way, subconsciously, without thinking about it. So that is because of implicit memory. Now implicit memory, it's of various types, so it can be divided into three main types. Now it's a subconscious memory, so it can be divided into three main types. Now the first type of implicit memory, it is called as the procedure. It's associated with the learning of procedures or skills. It's called as skill memory. So if a person learns some skill, the person is going to exactly memorize the method of that skill, and next time he's going to do it subconsciously. For example, if a person is learns how to play cricket, next time he is going to watch the cricket ball, then judge the speed of the ball and hit the ball at appropriate moment. So these all events, the person is going to learn them, he is going to memorize them, and next time, without thinking much, he is subconsciously going to do these events. So the areas of the brain involved in skill memory, they are corpus striatum, which is a part of basal ganglia. Another memory is called as a priming memory. So priming memory means, if we just say something, we are going to, so if someone says something, we are going to predict before the thing is complete, and that's because of priming memory. And so neocortex is involved in priming memory. Another part of the implicit memory is the conditioning memory. So conditioning memory is mainly the memory which automatically is produced in response to a particular stimulus. For example, Pavlov's experiment on dogs, when he used to ring a bell, the dogs automatically came for food. So the memory of food with the bell on the stimulus of the ringing sound. So it's an example of conditioning memory, and the main areas of the brain involved in conditioning memory, these are amygdala and cerebellum. Whenever we acquire knowledge of something, initially we are going to remember it only for some time. So it is initially called as a short-term memory. Then it can be converted into intermediate term memory and then into long-term memory. So short-term memory, it lasts for a few seconds to a few minutes only. Intermediate term memory, on the other hand, it can last for few days to few weeks, and after few weeks it will be forgotten if unless it's converted into long term memory. So it's the intermediate term memory. It will be forgotten unless it's converted to long term memory. And long term memory, it lasts from months, it can last for years or even for a lifetime. So we already discussed, in case of intermediate term memory, the change that take place at synapse, these are temporary change. So temporary physical and chemical change take place at synapse, and in case of long term memory, these changes are permanent. So permanent change take place at synapse in case of a long term memory. Now whenever we acquire some information, it's going to get converted into short term memory. So this short term memory will be converted into long term memory, and this work is done by hippocampus. Now this process of conversion of short-term memory into long-term memory is called as consolidation of memory. It's also called as, there's another term for this, it's also called as the long-term potentiation. So conversion of short-term memory into long-term memory. Now consolidation, it's again the same concept. It is the strengthening of synapses. So once synapses become strong enough, especially the synapses in the hippocampus, that results in consolidation of memory. And strengthening of synapses occur only when when we give repeated stimulus to the efferent part of the hippocampus. So that happens when we revise the fact again and again. Now let us try to understand it with the help of a diagram. So this is the part of the cortex which is called as neocortex. So the short term memory, the in the form of impulses, is going to the hippocampus, mainly from the neocortex, and from these neocortex these impulses go to the anterorhinal cortex. Now anterorhinal cortex is the part of cerebral cortex which is adjacent to the hippocampus. So impulses go to the anterorhinal cortex. Now for consolidation, the CA1 neurons of hippocampus, they are very much important. So these impulses have to reach to CA1 neurons, and continuous stimulation of these neurons will cause strengthening of synapses there, and that will cause consolidation of memory. Now there are two pathways. Either from anterorhinal cortex the impulse can directly go to CA1 neuron, so this is called as direct pathway, or there is another pathway. So from anterorhinal cortex the impulse can go to the dentate gyrus. So from anterorhinal cortex impulse will go to the dentate gyrus, and from dentate gyrus to CA3 neurons, and finally to CA1 neurons. So this pathway between anterorhinal cortex and dentate gyrus is called as perforant pathway. So from dentate gyrus impulses will go to the CA3 neurons, and the axons of CA3 neurons will go to the CA1 neurons. Now these are called as shafter collaterals. So axons of CA3 neurons form shafter collaterals, and they conduct the impulse to CA1 neurons. So continuous stimulation, so if the information comes many times by revising the fact many times, information is going to come to the anterorhinal cortex many times, and eventually this will result in strengthening of synapses in the CA1 neurons. So strengthening of these synapses will cause consolidation of memory, and we are going to remember it for a long time, so that will result in long-term memory. Now, if due to some reason there is a lesion in the hippocampus, so all this process cannot take place, consolidation of memory cannot take place, so the person will not be able to create new memories. So if he acquires some information, he will not be able to convert it into long-term memory. It is called as anterograde amnesia. Anterograde amnesia because of lesion in hippocampus. On the other hand, if there is a lesion in the thalamus, then the person will not be able to recall past memories. So this type of lesion, this type of amnesia is called as retrograde amnesia. Retrograde amnesia.